Right, hello everybody. This is a continuation of the video I did a year ago on these Tomy trains and my sort of mini restoration of them, and in particular the problems I had with this train, the Thomas the Tank Engine James train, which as you can see is still missing a motor. And this video is meant to be particularly about the motors, and that's why I've stripped down these three. We have the green original train, Percy, Thomas the Tank Engine, and the Intercity 125. I wasn't going to leave them apart, I was just going to take the motors out, but it makes sense to leave them apart so you can see the gearing inside, because that will be relevant later. I have taken out the three motors, we'll talk about those very shortly, but the idea is, with this one I've finally got around to getting some motors. It's taken me a year, and mainly the reason it's taken me a year is because I had to pluck up the courage to buy this. This is a laser, well, it's a digital tachometer, it's not laser. Digital tachometer does photo and contact with attachment that goes on the end, and they aren't exactly ridiculously expensive, but I needed to find a point where I could buy this so I can actually measure the RPM of the motors, because the biggest issue with finding these are original Mabuchi motors, and they're really difficult to find. I'm really struggling to find these exact motors, especially now I know the RPM. They seem fairly simple if you don't know the RPM, but they aren't. I looked at the Tamiya mini four-wheel drive motors, which I'll flash up on the screen now. These did look like they may have been correct at the time, but again, knowing the RPMs, none of these are suitable. Bear in mind, these are running at 1.5 volts, and that's quite important, especially because a lot of these motors are 3 volt motors, and running them at 1.5 volts doesn't necessarily get what you want. So these may still be special motors. I'm still not sure, I haven't been able to find these specific ones yet. So these motors are essentially the same, even though they're different colours from these three trains, 1, 2 and 3. They are marked as Mabuchi motor, all of them, so none of them are particularly different. I measured I only used the Percy and the Intercity for this, but I did some measurements using my tacho, which, yeah, it isn't absolutely perfect, but I was able to use one of the attachments to do a wheel RPM check on the back wheel. With Percy on the wheel I was getting approximately 140 RPM, and on the motor, if you take the motor off, I was using a bit of reflective tape wrapped around the gear. Don't have one to demonstrate in a minute, but it was wrapped around the gear. In fact, I do have one to demonstrate because it's still here. So a piece of reflective tape wrapped like that, and then measuring with the photo sensor, I was getting around 8,000 RPM at 1.5 volts. Then multiplying that by 2, because these are generally 3 volt motors, 13,400. The Intercity I also tested, and it got lower RPMs, but that motor screams. Poor little motor, it's not the happiest. So I may be replacing this motor as well. But they were, with the bench power supply, just fed with crocodile clip, little clip-on leads. So measured that, and I actually, this was on here but I didn't talk about it, to determine if this was correct, if my RPM measurement was vaguely correct from the motor RPM, because obviously there are losses. I worked out the gears and the gear train. So I've made a diagram of the gears, and I'll flash that up on the screen now. It'll be in the description. But with the number of teeth, the ratio, the ratio in both formats, and then working out from 8,000 down to approximately 152, which is close enough to 140 that it's the 13,400 is good enough. It's correct enough. So based on that, I had a look around again to see what motors I could find. Just going to move some props out of the way. See what motors I could find easily. And I came across 2 different motors that I could order pretty easily from Amazon. And they're in here. This broken box. One of them is a single motor, and the other is the other 20. They came as a pack of 20. And I have measured the RPM. Now, I knew this red motor would be too slow, but I bought it that was the reason I bought it. I knew it would be too slow. I wanted to see. So I've got measurements on here at 1.5 volts, 2300 RPM, and at 5 volts, 3 volts, sorry, 6500. 1.5 volts, 2300. 3 volts, 6500. Way too slow, clearly. But a much torquier motor than any of these. The rest of these are this type, which is quite a cheaply made motor, but still 7800 RPM at 1.5 volts, which is close enough to the 8000 that we had before that these should be good enough, in theory. We will see. These were £10, I think, for 20. We're not going to get absolutely brilliant quality here. They may not last very long, but I do have 20 of them. We will see. They're definitely the right size. They have the right connectors. One of the issues as well is having the right connectors. Some of them have them on the back, and that's not ideal. So, the old motor. I needed to get the gear off that so I could actually put it onto the new motor. Eagle-eyed people may have spotted the gear already, but before we get to that, here's the old motor in 3 pieces. It's technically in 4. I had to split the motor. There's still rust falling off it. Split the motor, to press the shaft off the gear, sort of. It kind of fell apart, and you can see how rusty. Hopefully it's in focus, but that's how rusty it is. Really quite rusty, and there's a hole. And yeah, in attempts to press it out, it kind of fell apart, and you can see the armature inside. Quite nice. Blue coated wire inside, and there's a piece missing because this is the front of the motor, and there's a piece of the shaft missing. Just touching this, I'm covered in rusty dust because I had to cut that off. I used my portable bandsaw on the table to cut the shaft so I could press out the shaft from the gear using the drill press, and I used a backwards drill bit backwards inside the chuck, locked in, so it's only gripping the plain shaft of the drill, and I used that as a press to press it out, which was successful. And I now have the gear, tiny little gear, just on its own, and it's a good fit for the shaft on the motor. It's not absolutely perfect. What I had to do to actually get it to fit was use a 2mm reamer. I have a set of reamers which I did actually intend to get so I could show you. There we go, you really can't see it much, but that's a 2mm reamer. Little cutting edges. Little hand reamer, which is very oily. And that was used just to ream that out to exactly 2mm. So it fits onto the shaft. And these are pressed on very tightly. There's no way I could realistically do that. So that's where this stuff comes in. This is Loctite 638. It's quite similar to Loctite 270, which I think is in a bigger bottle. Retaining compound, metal to metal, and it's intended for stuff like this. And there's very, very little load on these, so this stuff should be okay. As far as the position goes, I have a measuring stick, essentially, measuring device that I actually used when I was pressing the shaft out. The But that's a cutout, again made on the bandsaw, just cut into this ruler, stainless ruler, and the thickness of the ruler, coincidentally, is pretty much, in fact it's more perfect for some than others, it's very close to the correct position. It's less close than I thought it was, but it's a good measurement of the position of the gear. So I'm going to stick this on now, and then I'll install the motor, and we will see. Before I get to that, before I do that, let's move a couple more props out of the way. The other thing this is missing, and I'd actually forgotten about this until I mentioned it today, is the spring and the little plastic piece. It's missing from this completely. I have taken measurements of it, and it's just on the bottom of this paper here. I've taken all the measurements, and I'm going to draw it up in 3D Fusion 360, and I have a resin printer that should be able to print these. No idea if it'll work. I will see. I'm not sure if the resin will be able to take the abrasion from this front edge, but purely for testing this so that it works, I'll be picking out one of these, like so, and I'll use this in the James train just to test it. So stick that on, stick that in, and then fit the motor and see if it works. Yeah, the back or the top needs to go on as before, as I explained before, and all of these are point when taking these apart. The back ends are all propped up because the gear for the axle is at the bottom. If you don't prop it up, the wheels touch the ground, the weight drags it down, and it pops all of the gears out. They all jump out, which once you learn the gears isn't the end of the world, but it's not fun to have to keep putting it back together. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll resume the video afterwards. Right, okay, so the little thing is in, and the motor is in, as I just showed. It is fairly critical getting this in the right place, because the space here between this shaft and the gear is quite small at the best of times, so you don't want it to touch and interfere with this. That should be it, really. Going to put the top back on. Turns out these motors are actually really good for standing the thing on, so if you get 20, use some of them for that. Putting the top back on, making sure again that this is in the centre position, otherwise it'll never go on right. I mean, it doesn't always want to go on right anyway. That's moved out of position. There we go, so that's everything's in place. I'll just screw this back together. That's back together. Theoretically, repaired. I have 4 batteries here, which are fairly cheap batteries. They came with the tachometer, but they do work. I usually use any loops, but they don't quite have the same power, and I want to test this properly for the first time. So 1 AA. These contacts are still quite corroded. There's no guarantee this is actually going to work. I probably should have looked at the contacts first. Thankfully, we have some progress. Turns out these batteries are pretty terrible. Anyway, they don't weigh anything, and they don't have much current output, so never mind. I have an analog loop in this now, and that runs quite well. In fact, it's quite quick, and it has decent torque. Should we have a little race? I'll have to put one of these back together if I want to give it a race. But switch still needs a little work. This actually has reasonably good, they're a little brittle, but they're reasonably decent tyres on here. So it has quite good grip on the surface here. This is like a mouse pad surface. It has quite good grip. So it's able to spin the wheels still. That's great. It means that this motor may just be perfectly suited. And they come in a pack of 20, which is even better. They're not original Mabuchi. I may swap it at some point, but that's pretty good. Okay, so second inner loop in. This is the good engine, I suppose. That's the speed. Reasonably steady. That is quite loud. That is quite a high volume, I will admit. Dragging a battery with it. Trying to compare the speed, but the magnet just picks up everything. Yeah. Yeah, stop. So that is a little bit faster than this one, at least. May not be a bad thing. It seems to have the torque. But yeah, definitely these are the closest motors I've been able to find so far. These 7800 RPM ones, which technically seem to be lower RPM than the one in this on paper, but yeah, these are a pack of 20 off Amazon, so as standard replacements until I can get proper Mabuchi ones, I think I'm quite happy with these. I mean, that train should be usable again. I took the plastic piece out of the Intercity train and the spring to use, which seems to be fine in there. The noise is a little bit irritating, but these were never necessarily the quietest trains. This one may be a little bit noisy than the others because it's made differently, and this certainly is. There isn't the battery in it. That is quite quiet. What I'll do is I'll put the others together. I'll put them together and we'll do a noise comparison. So I'll be back with you again soon. Okay, so now I have 4 trains with batteries in, and we'll just compare the sound. So let's have a listen to these are 2 originals. Pretty similar. And Percy is actually much quieter in comparison to... That is much louder. So that's maybe something to bear in mind, that it's not a quiet motor, and it probably isn't, it definitely won't be built to Mabuchi standards. But if all you want is to make the train work, it does have quite a lot of torque. This may be all you need. These were £10 on Amazon. I'll put a link below. Your case may come pre-cracked like mine because they're just packaged like this. You kind of get what you pay for with these. Like I said, they aren't perfect. They're a little noisy, but if you want to get a train working and you haven't got any other options, these might be your best bet until there's a Mabuchi alternative. I've seen them on eBay. I might flash one up now. It's available from Japan. I might order one. Now I know that this works with these motors. It sort of gives me more confidence to try it. And now I've got that held on with the compound, it'll be a lot easier to take the gear off. They're not that easy to remove normally, like I said. So it'll be much easier to remove this and swap it over to another motor. And if I do that, if I get one, that'll be another video, and I'll demonstrate in there the difference. Anyway, I hope that was a useful follow-up to the original video. I'm hopefully going to have a 3D model of this part. If I have done it, I will flash it up on the screen now just to show you what it looks like. and I'll put a link in the description below to Thingiverse page where you can download it to 3D print. It's another thing that is experimental, so I'm not sure it'll work even when printed in resin. I haven't had my resin printer out for a while, so we will see. But I'll try it, and if it works, I'll let you know. Until next time, bye.